What is going on? It is Nate the Game Guy coming back with another video at hand, and today I want to talk to you guys about the worst things to deal with when being a game collector. Now don't get me wrong, this is a hobby that I really do enjoy partaking in. After all, I've been a game collector for several years. I'm standing right here in a room where I'm surrounded by video games and have an entire YouTube channel dedicated to game collecting. However, I will say that it isn't all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to game collecting. So of course, in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the worst things to deal with when you are a game collector, and also kind of talk about too that even though I recommend being a game collector, it may not necessarily be the right choice for everyone. So without further ado, let's dive right into this video subject, take a look at some reasons and some things about what are the worst things to deal with when being a game collector, right after the intro. Now, of course, I'll start off by talking about a really big turnoff about people that are potentially considering about becoming game collectors, and that is the fact that this is not a cheap hobby. In fact, it's pretty expensive. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of consoles that are cheap to collect for, and I'll recommend a few in this video right here that you guys can check out, where it's all about consoles that are overlooked by collectors. But of course, if you're going to be going after some of the consoles and games that just are well known and that people like and people enjoy collecting, yeah, you're going to have to put up some money with that. Yes, you can go to the thrift store, yard sales, Facebook Marketplace, and let's face it, the majority of game collectors are essentially trying to deal hunt, right? Is because if you are just normally paying a regular price for some of these games, like if you're going online, like on Amazon buying used listings, or Mercari or eBay or whatever, right? You're not necessarily going to be getting a deal. Now, of course, it's become a lot more competitive when trying to get a deal with games, but overall, I will still say that this is still a relatively expensive hobby to partake in. There are ways to slim down the costs and try to find some deals, and I recommend that's something you should do if you're going to dive right into this hobby. But of course, a con that's worth talking about being and dealing with the things that come with game collecting is, of course, the fact that this is kind of an expensive hobby. Now, of course, I've already mentioned that when deal hunting, it's been pretty competitive over the years when it comes to trying to get a good deal on games, which leads me to my next point about some of the worst things about being a game collector is the fact that this is also a pretty competitive hobby as well. So if you are somebody that is trying to get deals on games like at a thrift store, you better know very well that, hey, you probably should get to the thrift store as early as you can before they open, so that way you get to try to get the dibs on the games and be able to see which games are there and all that good stuff, right? And of course, you are also going to want to be well acquainted with the staff. Figure out like, hey, on this day, this is when they put out new inventory. So if I want to get first dibs on a possible game that might go on the shelf, you are probably going to want to know when they restock their stuff on a certain day. Of course, if you're going to be going to yard sales, you're going to want to get up earlier and get there earlier. After all, I've certainly have taken the L over the years when trying to get to different deals at yard sales where somebody's beat me to it because they got there earlier and I didn't. And even for things that are market value, right? If you are trying to find a Nintendo 64 like on Facebook Marketplace, and even though it's not really a deal, it's kind of at market value, people are going to try to go in and grab that 64. Like I said, it's a really competitive hobby, And I'm not saying that it's not enjoyable, but I will say that when dealing with some of the things that aren't necessarily the best things to deal with when it comes to game collecting, the competitive side of things is easily one of my least favorite things when dealing with just the overall scenario of being a game collector. Now, of course, when talking about some more things that are not so pleasant about being a game collector and dealing with things when it comes to game collecting, is the fact that this is a hobby that takes up a lot of space. Now, of course, if you are somebody who is a completionist, or essentially you are trying to complete as many game libraries and sets as possible, yeah, you're definitely going to need some space for that. However, if you are somebody that just wants to buy the games that you're only interested in, you want to play, all that wonderful stuff, I would still argue that this is an issue that you will probably run into as time goes on. Now, I will say one thing. Yes, you can make the argument of, oh, you could always downsize, or you could get a bigger place. But the truth of the matter is still the fact that space is always going to be an issue. Some people might not deal with it as much as compared to others, depending on how big their game room is. Like, is it in a basement? Is it in a spare bedroom? Is it in a garage where preferably it's got climate control in it, right? That's just the truth of the matter, is that this is a hobby that does take up space. So I will say one thing, that if you are somebody that doesn't really have a lot of space, but you still want to get into the hobby, you can still get into it, but I would say that you kind of really need to pick your battles, kind of, if that makes sense. You know, don't go for a complete set if you don't have the space, but just focus on, hey, these are the games I like to play, all that good stuff, and go for it. But yeah, space is not necessarily the best thing to deal with when being a game collector. Now, of course, this is something that I hate to deal with when being a game collector, but of course, you are going to come across a lot of games that people just have not treated well over the years. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you go to yard sales, thrift stores, if you buy bundles online, bundles locally, even at your local mom and pop retro games store or whatever, right? You're always going to come across like a Nintendo 64 label where it's ripped off, you know, the disc is scratched and, you know, it's probably not going to work. You go to the thrift store, you got somebody that felt like being a wise guy and taking out that copy of Madden 03 out of the original case or whatever, right? Not really so much of a big deal when you're dealing with sports games, but I'm sure you guys know what I mean when it comes to collecting as a whole. You're going to find a lot of games that are not really treated well after all of these years. Yes, it is part of the hobby. Yes, it is something to kind of be patient about. You know, you'll have to pass over one game to hopefully try to find that game in better shape somewhere or another, right? But of course, I mean, it's just not really something pleasant to look at. It's just because it's like, hey, you're taking your time, you're trying to go game hunting, all that wonderful stuff, right? It's just not really pleasant to deal with. Is, oh, cool, you find that one game that you want to get, and then you open up and, oh, yeah, the disc is missing, or it's scratched really bad. Like, somebody decided to use that thing as like sandpaper, like on their sidewalk or something. Like, yeah, not really the most pleasant things to deal with. But I will say that it is part of being a game collector. You know, you're going to find that stuff from time to time. But yeah, not really something I really enjoy dealing with when it comes to game collecting. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my video. Please be sure to check out these videos here, and here. After all, I post a lot of content when it comes to game collecting tips, and other video game related subjects. So be sure to keep an eye out every Monday and Friday where I upload consistently, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.